A pile of black rock 25 kilometres south of a small Queensland town has swallowed people whole for a century and a half. Not metaphorically. Search parties have walked into its boulder field looking for someone missing and come back having found nothing at all. Not a boot, not a hat, not a single disturbed stone to suggest anyone had ever been there. This is the first video on a new channel built around exactly this kind of Australian story, the parts of our history that sit just outside the reach of a tidy explanation. If that sounds like your thing, this is the place to subscribe. Why search parties stopped going in. Most write-ups of Black Mountain list the disappearances and move on to the legend. Few stop to explain why finding someone there is so different from finding someone lost in ordinary bushland. Standard search procedure for a missing person relies on a handful of basic assumptions. People leave a trail, dogs can follow scent. A grid search on foot or from the air can usually rule an area in or out within a day or two. None of that holds at Black Mountain. The boulder field has no soil layer at all in most sections, which means no footprints, no disturbed ground, nothing for a tracker to read. The gaps between boulders extend downward into voids that searchers cannot see from above and frequently cannot access even with ropes, because removing one boulder to reach a void can shift the boulders around it. Police involved in past searches have described having to call off attempts entirely, not because they had exhausted the search area, but because continuing risked burying a rescuer alongside whoever they were looking for. Specialist caving equipment, the kind that can be lowered into a known vertical shaft, is frequently useless here because the voids inside Black Mountain are not single shafts, but a connected branching network with no reliable map and no two access points guaranteed to lead anywhere near each other. A missing person at Black Mountain is not simply hard to find. In a meaningful number of cases, they are structurally unfindable, sealed inside a formation that nobody, including trained search and rescue teams with the right equipment, can safely take apart. That single fact does more to explain the mountain's reputation than any ghost story attached to it. A place doesn't need to be supernatural to become legendary. It just needs to consistently defeat the normal process by which missing people get found. There is a detail about Black Mountain that gets mentioned constantly and explained rarely. The mountain makes noise. Locals living near it for generations have described hearing loud cracks, sometimes compared to gunfire or distant dynamite, coming from inside the rock pile with no visible cause, often loud enough to carry well beyond the boundary of the national park itself. The explanation, once you go looking for it, is mundane and slightly unsettling at the same time. Granite expands when it heats up under direct tropical sun and contracts sharply when a sudden downpour cools it. Do that often enough, for long enough, and individual boulders eventually fracture under the stress, sometimes violently enough to be heard from a significant distance. One local account collected decades ago described it plainly. In summer, when the rock gets very hot, a sudden cool downpour forces the boulders to contract, and occasionally the pressure is so great a boulder will explode, audible for miles like dynamite detonating. The same account notes pale, powdery patches scattered across the mountain's surface, marking the exact spots where a previous explosion had occurred, a kind of visible scar tissue left behind on the rock itself. What makes this detail worth dwelling on is not the explanation itself, but what it implies. The mountain is not a static, inert pile of rock sitting quietly in the landscape. It is still actively changing, still cracking, still rearranging its own internal structure, decades and centuries after the boulders first settled into place. Every loud crack from inside Black Mountain is a small reminder that the maze beneath the surface is not fixed. The voids a search team mapped last year may not be the same voids that exist today, which on its own is enough to explain why repeated searches of the same general area can produce completely different results. The wildlife that exists nowhere else. Here is something that almost never makes it into the disappearance stories, because it doesn't fit the tone. Black Mountain's boulder field is the only known habitat on Earth for 3 separate species. A frog, a skink, and a gecko, all found exclusively inside this one formation and nowhere else on the planet, not even in superficially similar boulder fields elsewhere in Queensland. Researchers studying these species have to work the same terrain that has defeated search and rescue teams navigating into the gaps and crevices by hand, often at significant personal risk, to document animals whose entire global population may number in the low thousands. Fieldwork here means crawling into the same dark, narrow spaces that have swallowed missing people, except deliberately, repeatedly, in pursuit of a creature small enough to disappear into a crack barely wide enough for a human hand. The conditions that make the mountain so dangerous to humans, the absence of soil, the deep, stable, dark voids between boulders, the consistent internal temperature insulated from the tropical heat outside, are exactly the conditions that allowed these 3 species to evolve in total isolation, cut off from related populations elsewhere by terrain too hostile for almost anything else to cross. It is a strange kind of symmetry. The same physical structure responsible for swallowing missing people without a trace has also, over a much longer timescale, manufactured 3 entirely unique forms of life that exist nowhere else in the world. Danger and biodiversity, produced by the exact same pile of rock, neither one cancelling the other out. What the searchers actually found it is worth being specific about what little physical evidence the documented disappearances have ever produced, because the vagueness is part of what keeps the legend alive. In the case of the 2 cattlemen who went missing in 1882, one man eventually walked out alive but could not coherently explain where he had been or what had happened during the time he was gone. That detail tends to get told as evidence of something uncanny. Read differently, it describes a man who had likely been lost, dehydrated, and disoriented in extreme heat for an extended period, conditions well known to produce genuine memory gaps and confused, inconsistent recollection with no supernatural explanation required at all. In the 1928 case, the prospector's body was eventually recovered, along with his rifle, and a gunshot wound was noted, though the precise circumstances were never conclusively settled. A bushranger and his companions reportedly vanished into the boulder field rather than face capture, and the police search that followed found nothing, not bodies, not horses, not equipment. Whether that means the men successfully evaded the search, perished somewhere inaccessible, or something else happened entirely, is a question the existing record simply cannot answer with confidence either way. This is the genuinely uncomfortable part of the Black Mountain story. It is not that the evidence points towards something inexplicable. It is that the terrain itself is so effective at destroying or concealing evidence that in case after case, there simply isn't enough information left to draw any firm conclusion at all. The mystery isn't built on strange clues. It's built on the near total absence of clues, in a landscape almost perfectly designed to produce exactly that outcome. What the traditional owners have always said: strip away the modern retellings and the core warning embedded in the place predates all of them. The Kuku Yalanji name, Kalkajaka, translates as place of the spear, and the site has long been understood by traditional owners as carrying genuine spiritual danger, distinct in kind from other significant sites nearby. Traditional owners do not enter the formation. That is not framed as superstition by the people who hold that knowledge. It is framed as an accurate, tested understanding of a specific place, arrived at across a far longer span of time than any European account of the mountain has existed. What is striking, looking at the full picture, is how little daylight there actually is between that traditional position and what the physical evidence independently supports. The mountain is dangerous. People who enter it sometimes do not come back. And when they do, the terrain has frequently destroyed whatever evidence might explain what happened to them. Two entirely different ways of knowing. One carried in story across thousands of years. One built from 20th century police reports and geological surveys, arrived at functionally the same conclusion: stay out. Black Mountain does not need an invented explanation. It has a real one, built from granite, gravity, heat, and gaps deep enough to defeat anyone who goes looking. That happens to be more unsettling than a ghost story, not less, because it means the danger is permanent, ongoing, and entirely indifferent to whoever walks toward it next. If this is the kind of Australian story you want more of, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which strange corner of this country you think deserves the next look.